Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Grow Wealthy Grooming. My name is Riverly, and I'm the founder of the Savvy Groomer, where we teach you guys, pet groomers, right, to go from being burnt out, broken to healthy, wealthy, and happy, building a grooming business on your terms. So today's episode is sponsored by the Pay Masterclass. This is a 6-module masterclass where we teach you guys all about how to pay your employees legally. Okay. So if you're not familiar at all with the Pay Masterclass, it's an amazing class. You know, the truth is that 50% is bullshit. We here at the Savvy Groomer have cracked the code at paying employees a livable wage they're happy with and creating sustainable profit in the pet grooming business owners. So we're going to introduce you guys to the Pay Masterclass, a 6-module exploration how to pay employees legally. And it's specifically designed for the pet grooming businesses. We're going to be busting myths while teaching you the skills and winning formula to create a pay structure that actually works. Oh, sorry about that. So let me actually introduce today my co-host. This is attorney Jim Atchison. Jim, introduce yourself to everyone here.
Hey, everybody. My name is Jim Atchison. I'm an attorney based out of Providence, Rhode Island. Also work in Massachusetts, New York, up and down the East Coast with Darragh Everett. We're a general service law firm. I specialize in working with new and growing small businesses and very excited to get involved in the grooming industry.
He's too modest. He actually helped us teach the first time we did the Pay Masterclass. He helped us teach Module 1 last week, and he will be teaching Module number 2 in the Pay Masterclass actually tomorrow in the Savvy Groomer membership. So, Jim, we always appreciate having an attorney and having expertise. And that actually brings us to what today we're going to be talking about. So today we're going to be discussing, should my business pay employees salary? Now, this was something I had actually learned from you, Jim. I had actually learned about, again, the pros, the cons, and then the reality of paying salary. So I'm actually going to let the expert teach this. And I'm going to be here to add insight and expertise from the grooming side. But I'd love to see your insight about this.
Sure. I guess, kind of the way to start here is we can look at, paying employee salary versus doing commissions or something like that. Some of the benefits that you're going to see, and this is from a practical sense as much as a legal sense, but some of the benefits you're going to see is predictability. When you have employees that are on salary or something like hourly, where they have a certain number of hours that they work, you're able to, budget and know how much it's going to be out there. If there is a situation where there's some overtime, at least you'll know ahead of time what it's going to look like. And for a salary employee, it's generally going to be the same pay week in, week out, giving you the ability to budget and manage your finances, plan for the future a lot easier because payroll is usually a massive expense. Gives you stability. When an employee is on salary, they're typically guaranteed a set amount of pay each period, which is good for them too, because it can help provide a sense of stability and security for both the employee and the employer. Happy employees are always better employees, and employees that have a sense of security and stability at their work are usually happier employees. Time and attendance, one of the things people sometimes don't love about paying a salary is that, the hours, are you sure they're going to get enough work in? However, what you don't have to do is worry about punching in, punching out, tracking attendance, tracking time, tracking overtime and stuff like that. And in my experience, usually if it's an employee of the caliber that you're going to offer a salary to, as opposed to an hourly one, that's an employee that's going to be there day in, day out when they need to be there anyway. And they're also going to jump at, something comes up in the evening, off hours, they're going to be helpful with that as well. Incentives. You may have access to incentives such as bonuses or other benefits, which can help motivate them to perform their best. Nothing really, I think, helps an employee feel appreciated than getting a little something extra. Even if it's just a gift card to Starbucks or Dunkin' Donuts or something like that.
I love my Starbucks, so I
That's
feel
right.
that, right?
That's
Yeah.
right. It's the thought that counts. I've never had an employer give me a gift card or a little something and, been upset about it. I always like that. It's nice that they were thinking about me and recognizing it in a tangible way.
I was going to say the only thing I think that people that I learned from you that I think is really important for us to cover during this is that for better, for worse, I think a lot of people, when they think of salary, they also forget that technically we need to have, we need to talk about non-exempt versus exempt. And for those of you guys that aren't familiar with that, exempt means that they don't have to worry about overtime. And then non-exempt means you do. Now, one thing you had mentioned was about not needing to track their time and attendance. I know with salary you don't have to, but at the Savvy Groomer we have a very low risk tolerance. So I suggest even if you don't technically have to, you should anyway. For better, for worse, you don't want to be in a position where someone is saying, "Oh, I had more hours than I thought I did." Right. And you have to worry about that. In salary, now you're like, well, why would that matter? And that's where we come to exempt versus non-exempt, because you actually had taught me more about exempt versus non-exempt when it came to salary. And you taught me something about salaries that I didn't even know about. So do you want to share with everyone why we actually don't suggest here at the Savvy Groomer that you pay your grooming employees a salary?
Yeah, so salary can get a little tricky. This is all governed by the Fair Labor Standards Act, or the FLSA, on the federal level. And then states also typically have their own similar Fair Labor Standards Act, it might be called like a mini FLSA, which really sets forth the standards for employee pay to do it in a legal way. And the best way to think about it is that all the rules and the exemptions about paying employees, it's to protect employees from not being paid overtime for jobs that they should be paid overtime. You're never going to get in trouble for paying an employee an hourly pay as long as you pay the overtime and pay the minimum wage and pay the minimum hours. So when you have salaried employees, the government puts in rules to make sure that you're not taking advantage of salary in order to pay people less by not having to pay them overtime. So there are certain rules that are put on it. A good example is, a salary employee typically has to make 1.5, at least 1.5 times the minimum wage, and it's the higher of the federal minimum wage or your state's minimum wage. Again, so you're kind of building in some overtime off of at least a minimum wage rate. Also, there are specific categories of jobs that qualify for exempt salary status, and they're typically administrative jobs and managerial positions. So, a supervisor, someone in charge, somebody working as a secretary, as a receptionist, as a scheduler, something like that, but not the people grooming and doing the business the work that the business does.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And I don't know, is someone listening to music in your background or what's going on over there?
Yeah, it's the sounds of Providence at 7 o'clock at night, apparently.
Yeah, I guess, huh? There must be some sort of like, it makes sense. There's probably some sort of like parade or something going on.
It's
But
always
oh,
protest.
oh God, God bless. So, one of the things that we had talked about when we taught the pay master class is how you actually technically can't add in things like manual labor. And I know in specifically, right? And let me actually pull up in the slides that we have, right?
Mhm.
I know we have this here. Yes, let me pull this up right now. So in the pay master class, we talked about like in order to be an salary exempt, they must be paid above a certain level and work in administration, which is a non-manual labor role. And that was something really interesting.
Correct. And again, that's just to kind of get around, paying somebody minimum wage and not having to pay them overtime. So essentially, in order to protect against, employers from doing that, they say, well, the minimum salary has to be at least 1.5 times the minimum wage, so that they're, at least getting that amount as their base pay.
Right. And so, guys, because it has to be a non-labor role, which the majority of the roles in the grooming industry are labor intensive, right? So, salary exempt doesn't really work for the grooming industry because you want that position to, the positions that you would want to be salary, like you would want your receptionist or your manager, right, to be salary. You want them to be able to help other staff, right? And they can't do manual labor if they're salary exempt. So, for instance, I believe, and I know we have the number somewhere, and in fact, if you can look that up for me, I know it was like a certain percentage of labor they can actually do versus not do.
Mhm.
Um, you know, you want them to be able to get their hands dirty. Like if I have a grooming salon manager, right, and I have them on salary, they're actually not supposed to, because again, it's supposed to be a non-labor role, go in the back and help, right? They're not supposed to be bathing dogs. They're not supposed to be grooming dogs, right? And again, we are so focused on this industry right now at stopping misclassified employees or classifying our employees in ways that really don't serve them.
Mhm.
So I think that's what's been so interesting about that, right?
Exactly right. Exactly right. And sometimes it winds up working better, to have them as hourly employees as opposed to salary employees. As long as you put the controls in there to make sure that they're working the scheduled hours and not doing additional work and stuff like that. Because you do have to pay hourly employees for the work that they do, even if you tell them don't do any more work, right? If they do the work, you have to pay them. So you just have to make sure, they're trained and understand that.
Well, and I think the grooming industry right now is in a position where they're trying really hard to figure out how they're going to like deal with, because and Jim, I taught him about our industry, people paying 50% commission, right? And again, guys, what I always feel annoyed by, and I try not to, right, is that often I hear you guys say like, oh, 50% commission, da, 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 da. Well, 50% commission is actually not a livable wage, right? I can't go to the bank and say, yeah, I make 50% commission, right? I can't do that. I can't go and get a mortgage and say, "Oh, I earn 50%." I have to say I earn 30,000 a year. I earn 50,000 a year. I earn $100,000 a year. This false sense of I am not going to earn enough unless if I make 50% is really limiting us as an industry. It's, hobbling our business owners, right? It's absolutely hobbling them. And the flip side with, for us as groomers, we're not forcing the business owners to do the math. If I'm getting paid 50%, right, and it's $30,000, I would have been better off getting a different job and earning more money per hour. And I think that's really where we're not creating that sense of, come on. So I have a cat who wants to come up. Get up here. Thank you. He says hi. Maybe a little shit as I get it in my face. But yeah, so anyway, so that's basically it, guys. Like, right, you want to make sure that you're paying your employees legally. You want to make sure that you're giving yourself the best opportunity for your business. And for grooming employees, you might be like, awesome, I'm a groomer and I would love to be salaried. I'd love to have a set amount of money. But even then, you've just learned that if you are a salaried groomer, you're technically a misclassified employee.
That's exactly right. Because really, what it comes down to is, what's your primary responsibility? So even if you have someone who's acting as a manager, which typically would be, and like you said, River, correctly, if you have someone that's a manager, which is typically allowed to be a salaried exempt employee, but that manager is grooming more than 50% of the time, their primary job isn't a manager; it's a groomer. It's managerial add-ons. So if the person's primary job that they spend more than 50% doing something other than managerial or administrative work, that's going to be a misclassified employee that has to be paid on an hourly basis.
Right. And I think it's really interesting. And I was having this conversation with a student is they're like, well, what if, what's considered manual labor? And I'm like, well, that's a great question. And that's exactly why you're better off doing something like hourly, right? Because it's a gray area depending upon if you ever get, in Actually, would that be considered audited if you were, right? So if you had a misclassified employee, how does that even begin? Does that go
Yeah.
ahead?
Typically begins with a complaint from a former employee or a current employee. They can report it either to the state, typically Department of Labor or something like that, or the federal Department of Labor, or lawyer if they go to a lawyer. And then if it's to a state agency or a federal agency, they'll do exactly that. They'll do an audit, which is essentially an investigation where they're going to look at your job titles, they're going to look at the employees, and they're going to look at the payroll records that you have. And if you don't have the payroll records, that's going to be held against you. It's not something like, oh, they're not here, too bad. That's going to be something that it will be held against you, that you don't have accurate payroll records that are being kept. They'll interview employees. I mean, it's a full investigation and a full audit into all of your payroll practices.
Yeah, and that's scary because I mean, even if you're innocent, one of my students in group mentoring, they actually had mentioned that one of their employees had not been clocking out for their lunch, and they're like, "Oh man, I haven't been paying them for that," right? Because they assumed that that person was clocking out, and now they're like, "Okay, do I have to go back and pay for all those hours? Like, what do I even do?" Right? And I think that's a tricky situation. And in fact, I'm excited to have you in group mentoring to be able to answer that question. Now, I am seeing a comment. I don't know if you see this in the chat, Jim. So we're going to pull this up. So one of our Facebook users asked, I'm a salaried manager, but required to groom 1 day a week. Is this acceptable or should I be hourly? So there is a certain percentage that you're allowed to do, quote unquote, manual labor. The question is, again, and Jim, you would know more about the percentages of that manual labor. And if you want to speak on that, feel free.
Yeah, it's whatever you spend more than 50% doing. So someone who is a manager that spends more than 50% of the time doing managerial functions, but maybe has to fill in grooming, here and there when someone out or it's really busy or something like that, that's going to be okay. So, if it's a salaried manager that grooms 1 day a week, if they're grooming for 8 hours 1 day a week, as long as they're working more than 8 hours the rest of the week, then you're going to be in good shape. Again, it's you're never going to get in trouble paying somebody hourly. So that's really the safest way to do it. But as long as you have somebody that's doing the type of job that can be a salary employee, you just have to make sure they're not spending more than 50% of their time doing something like grooming, maybe along those lines.
I could have sworn it was closer to like 20 or 25, but that could be state to state as well.
That's right.
Okay. So, and again, that does depend upon what state you're in. But one thing I will say this is that, if you're not quite sure if you're a misclassified employee, you can always, reach out and we can always explore that. That said, again, it becomes a gray area. So I'm expected to groom 1 day a week. It's like, okay, but how many hours is that compared to the other hours you're working? Are there any other physical labor you're doing? For instance, are you helping out the other groomers? Like if they're slow, are you helping them bathe dogs? Are you, and again, what is considered manual labor? If I have to, rearrange all the shampoo bottles and they're huge, they're gallons, like, is that manual labor? It's kind of a gray area. So a lot of times, as employees, we're like, oh, I really want a salaried position, but nobody is really offering you a salaried non-exempt, right? Which would mean that you're getting salary plus overtime, right? So for instance, if you have to stay late and finish grooming dogs, or if you have to stay late because that last client hasn't picked up, they don't want to pay you the hours for you to do that. Or if you've got to come in on your day off, right, and deal with the plumber or whatever, they don't want to pay you for that time. It's all about fairness, right? I don't think it's particularly fair for them to say, listen, you're going to be salary, and do all the annoying things, right? Like you're going to have to stay late some days. You're going to have to come in early some days. Sometimes you have to come in on your day off, right? If somebody calls out, you're going to have to pick up all those grooms, right? I don't think it's fair to ask you to do all those things and forgo your overtime. And a lot of times we have things where we are in a real gray area, right? We're in a real gray area. And the question is, ultimately, is it worth being wrong? And being hourly, you're never going to have a problem, right? And a business owner is generally not going to be like, cool, your salary, and we're going to pay you overtime, right? They're going to be like, cool, your salary, and we're going to make sure you work at least 35 to 37 hours. And if you work 50 or 60 hours, whatever your paid salary, right? It's never like, okay, some weeks you work 30 and some weeks you work 45, right? It's generally, okay, some weeks you work 37 and sometimes you work 45, right?
Right.
Absolutely. So guys, I really appreciate you guys being here. There are so many different ways of paying, your employees, and in the pay masterclass, we really do go in more depth to that, right? And if you guys are learning more about the employee pay masterclass, go ahead and check us out at savvygroomer.com/PGMC. And again, this is a 6-module masterclass where we teach you guys all about paying your employees. So I want to thank you guys so much for joining me for this episode of Grow Wealthy Grooming. Again, visit me at savvygroomer.com to see any current opportunities to work with me in growing your grooming business, plus more free resources to learn. Okay. I know I'm terrible at getting these slides up. Tiffany's going to yell at me. She's going to tell me. She's like, what are you doing, girl? If you guys are interested in joining group mentoring, that's savvygroomer.com/group, right? This has been a Q&A, all about, salaried employees. I think that's an important thing that as a business, right, as an industry, we need to do better for our employees. And one of these things is the answer to, exempt commission, which is commission without overtime, is not salary exempt. It's going to be hourly with overtime and a production bonus. Okay.
If only someone could, set up like a point system or something like that you could use to help with that process.
It's funny you mentioned that. I know, right? So thank you guys so much for being here. I really appreciate your time. And as always, guys, Jim, say goodbye if you'd like. And if they want to know how to reach you, please let them know. Yes.
Sure. Bye, everyone. Great being here. Again, my name is Jim Atchison. I'm with the law firm Darrow Everett. And if you need to get a hold of me, give me a call, 401-453.
Don't give them your cell phone number, Jesus Christ.
That's my office number.
Oh, God.
And looking forward to hearing from anybody.
All right. Talk to you guys soon. Bye now.